Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of Views of an Outsider, the Outsider's View from May 18th. If you want to keep up with everything that's going on in the world, but you don't want to drag down your entire life by listening to the news every day, then get the main stories right here once a week and spend the rest of your time living your best life. The week started out with multiple reports that President Trump is considering accepting a luxury jet from Qatar. On Sunday, ABC News first broke the story about the Middle Eastern country possibly gifting the so-called Flying Palace, which is estimated to be worth $400 million to the president. This announcement was followed by a torrent of deserved criticism, including criticism from many people who usually support Trump. But the president dismissed their valid concerns in a post on Truth Social, which read, "So the fact that the Defense Department is getting a gift, free of charge, of a 747 aircraft to replace the 40-year-old Air Force One temporarily, in a very public and transparent transaction, so bothers the crooked Democrats that they insist we pay top dollar for the plane. Anyone can do that. The Dems are world-class losers. MAGA." Okay. So, in doing this, I will just say that you come across as being both hypocritical and corrupt by accepting luxury gifts from these same terrorist supporters that you rightly criticize American universities for accepting funding from. Now, I know you like your shiny toys, and I know that you like people kissing your ring, but this does not sit well with most people, and it is not worth it, so buy your own toys. You have the money. I did not elect a president for my country, the United States, just so that he could be bought by America's enemies. Not acceptable. Hey, I warned everyone last week, when Trump does good things, I will praise them as good things, and the left can get in a huff. And the same goes for the right when he does bad things. And this is a very bad thing that is not okay. You would be wise, Mr. President, not to alienate the people who are willing to support you and who want you to succeed, just to satisfy a stubborn streak so that you can have a new bauble. ABC News reported that the United States would receive the Boeing 747-8 jumbo jet for Trump to use as the new Air Force One just before he leaves office, after which the jet would be transferred to the Trump Presidential Library Foundation. But Qatar's media told the Washington Post that this report was inaccurate and stressed that nothing had been finalized yet. Qatar is one of the richest nations in the world, and they spend massive sums of money in order to gain influence in the United States. Qatar also uses its riches to bankroll terrorist groups like Hamas and the corrupt Middle Eastern news outlet Al Jazeera. The oil-rich government of Qatar frequently invites politicians on state-funded junkets to the Middle East, where they are treated to all the luxuries that Qatar has to offer. Trump himself was expected to visit Qatar during this week as part of a swing through the Middle East. This will be the second foreign trip of his second term. As I said, it is not just Democrats or far-left progressives who are criticizing this. Many people on the right are doing so as well. Pro-Trump journalist Laura Loomer urged Trump not to accept this gift from Qatar, saying full stop, quote, "I love President Trump. I would take a bullet for him. But I have to call a spade a spade. This is really going to be such a stain on the administration if this is true." Yup. It cannot really be overstated how much of a black mark and how much of a breach of trust this is going to be if he goes through with this. Plus, there's the security risk of surveillance that will be all over that plane, and which would allow actual terrorist sponsors to monitor highly sensitive moments of internal American government. Listen to the people, Mr. President. This is not okay with them. And that is not just my opinion. According to the United States Constitution, Article 1, Section 9, Clause 8, any person holding an office of profit or trust in the United States government is prohibited from accepting any, quote, present, emolument, office, or title of any kind whatever from any king, prince, or foreign state without the consent of Congress. This clause, which is known as the Foreign Emoluments Clause, was designed in order to prevent foreign powers from buying influence with U.S. officials via gifts or benefits. It is intended to safeguard the independence and integrity of the United States government and its officials. Also, no matter how much Trump likes free luxuries and having his ass kissed, this isn't allowed legally without the express approval of Congress, which I trust will not be forthcoming, or at least it better not be. Either way, this is a very bad look for the administration, and they would be wise to shut themselves down concerning this matter, rather than to be shut down from the outside by the other branches of the government. But at the very least, you gotta love our founding fathers' checks and balances. Bless you. One final point. To the people who will defend Trump no matter what, even when he's wrong, which I will not do, this is not, contrary to what they are saying, like America accepting the Statue of Liberty. 1. The Statue of Liberty was approved by Congress, as required by the Constitution. This isn't. 2. The Statue of Liberty was not a surveillance platform or a security risk. This is. 3. The Statue of Liberty was a gift from France, our very first ally. This is a gift from an enemy with an agenda. 4. The Statue of Liberty did not transfer to, say, George Washington's personal property at the end of his second term. This does. Not the same, not the same, not the same, not the same. People do not respond to blind loyalty or straw men, so I would encourage all of you to stop and support the good while maintaining your credibility by calling out the bad. Or you will set up the situation that puts the left back into power, just like the left set up their own fall by defending Joe Biden's senility. You have been warned. So now let's talk about some good news. That same day, the governor of Texas, Greg Abbott, announced that the state had put an end to the construction of Epic City, a massive development outside of Dallas that was intended to be exclusively for Muslims only, and where Sharia law was expected to be imposed on the residents. You picked the wrong state to try to colonize America. Abbott declared on X, quote, Texas has halted any construction of Epic City. There is no construction taking place. The state of Texas has launched about a half dozen investigations into this project. That includes criminal investigations. And the U.S. Department of Justice is also investigating. This matter and similar matters are taken very seriously, and actions are being taken to address all concerns. His statement came days after news that the Trump administration's Department of Justice had launched an investigation into the project. And that came after Texas Senator John Cornyn warned a master-planned community of thousands of Muslims could violate the constitutional rights of Jewish and Christian Texans by preventing them from living in this new community and discriminating against them within the community. I further encourage the department to investigate whether Christians, Jews, and other non-Muslim minorities would receive equal protection under the law in this new community. Religious-based discrimination, whether explicit or implicit, is unconstitutional under the First and the 14th Amendments. Yup. There isn't an ounce of America that you can keep me or any other American of any race or religion off of, so I advise you to stop trying it. That is not how we do things here. We are not a segregated society, so adapt or leave. We don't do apartheid. Returning to more betrayals of the public trust. More than 1 in 20 women end up needing a second abortion after the abortion pill fails them, according to new analysis of insurance claim data. Over 5% of women had to undergo a repeat abortion attempt within 45 days of taking mifepristone, according to the analysis from the Ethics and Public Policy Center. The center analyzed insurance claim data from 865,727 mifepristone abortions between 2017 and 2023. A total of 45,498 women needed a second abortion attempt to complete their abortion after mifepristone failed, according to the data. Of those 45,000 plus women, more than half of them, 24,563, needed a surgical abortion procedure. Nearly 7,000 women underwent both a second medication abortion attempt and a surgical abortion attempt after their first mifepristone attempt failed. This is the latest evidence in a growing pile that advocates for the prescription have misconstrued the safety and efficacy of the abortion pill. Analysis that was released last month found that more than 1 in 10 women experience a serious adverse event after taking mifepristone abortion pills in 2023. Serious adverse events include hemorrhaging, needing a blood transfusion, requiring an emergency room visit, and deadly conditions like sepsis. The likelihood of these events is about 22 times higher than what the FDA listed them when it came to the label for Mifeprex, which is the brand name of mifepristone, back in 2023 when they created this label. Nearly 14%, which is around 1 in 6 women, experience either a serious adverse event or require a repeated abortion attempt after taking the abortion pill. The report's authors concluded that the FDA should immediately reinstate stronger patient safety protocols that were previously in place for mifepristone, and that stated that women must obtain abortion pills in person from a healthcare provider rather than allowing them to obtain them online through the mail. The co-authors of the analysis, Ryan Anderson, who is president of the Ethics and Public Policy Center, and Jamie Bryan Hall, the center's director of data analysis, also recommended that the FDA should mandate the reporting of the abortion pill's side effects so that we would have more accurate information and reconsider its approval altogether. They told the Daily Wire, "Our real-world data represents the actual experiences of women who take the abortion pill in the United States today. These women may have pre-existing health conditions and may not receive proper care before, during, or after the abortion. The women recruited into the clinical trials were relatively young and healthy, and they receive carefully controlled regimen of care. Frequent in-person visits would have enabled doctors to diagnose and treat any side effects earlier before they could become serious. This is how it should be for every woman. This is why it's so important for the FDA, at a minimum, to reinstate its original safety protocols, which more closely resemble the conditions of a clinical trial. Both proponents and opponents of legalized abortion should be able to support this move to protect women's health, end quote. Correct. If the point is to avoid unsafe back-alley abortions for women, then allowing women to get an unsafe drug online without a doctor's supervision and without widespread distribution of the information concerning the likely risks and making them aware of the warning signs of complication falls under the category of unsafe abortions they were supposed to be avoiding by both sides. Right? And when it comes to finding common ground in ugly fights, on Monday, the United States and China announced that they had reached an agreement to significantly reduce tariffs for the next 90 days while trade negotiations continue after top American and Chinese officials met in Switzerland last weekend. The deal means that President Trump's 125% reciprocal tariffs on China will be reduced to 10%, with a 20% fentanyl tariff still in place, which is a significant drop from the 145% tariff placed on Chinese goods in the last few weeks. China will drop its retaliatory tariff on the United States from 125% to 10%, and lift non-tariff restrictions, presumably including their ban on exporting rare earth minerals. The reductions will be in place by Wednesday, May 14th. However, Secretary Bessent said that the United States will continue a strategic rebalancing in many areas that were exposed as supply chain weaknesses during COVID, whether it's medicines, whether it's semiconductors, steel. We will continue moving towards U.S. independence or reliable supplies from allies. Stock markets worldwide surged in response to the temporary agreement. When news of the deal broke, the Dow Jones Industrial Average jumped more than 1,000 points, and the S&P 500 rose more than 3%, erasing all of its losses from last month, and the Nasdaq shot up more than 4%, marking a 20% increase from its recent low in April. The U.S. stock futures also jumped. Now, in some truly fantastic news involving the best belated Mother's Day gift that any mother could want to receive, the last living American hostage, Edan Alexander, was released on Monday after spending 584 days in captivity under Hamas. The 21-year-old's release was negotiated by the Trump administration, with Hamas not getting any Arab prisoners in exchange, as it had done in previous deals. Alexander's parents fought tirelessly for his release, meeting with world leaders, speaking at high-profile events, and constantly keeping his name in the media. Alexander was handed over by Hamas to the Red Cross without any of the typical vulgar public propaganda displays that Hamas has carried out during other hostage handovers. Israel Hayom reported that Alexander's family said that after Edan's release, he may travel to Qatar to meet President Trump, depending on his medical condition. 58 hostages remain in Gaza, including the bodies of 4 American citizens, Judith Weinstein Haggai, Gadi Haggai, Ete Chen, and Omer Nutra. On Monday, the Hostage and Missing Family Forum published an ad in the New York Post pleading for the remaining hostages not to be forgotten and declaring that their hope rests with Trump. With Edan Alexander's return, there are 20 hostages that are believed to still be alive remaining in captivity. Last week, Trump ordered a plan for humanitarian aid to be delivered to Gaza in a way that attempts to keep the terror organization from stealing it, as they have done with the aid that Israel has been providing. Ambassador Huckabee said nobody is interested in helping Hamas because Hamas has taken food that was intended to help very desperate citizens and stolen it from them, sold it on the black market, and then took the money to buy weaponry to murder more people. On Monday, Trump signed a new executive order to dramatically lower the prices of prescription drugs. He said that this would lower drug prices in the United States by up to 80% by implementing the, quote, most favored nation policy, cutting out industry middlemen, and compelling the European Union and other allies to pay for part of research and development of various drugs rather than just reaping the benefits of our innovation. Trump argued that since other nations set price controls for drugs, it's been America that has been taking on these research and development costs, saying, quote, starting today, the U.S. will no longer subsidize the health care of foreign countries. We will no longer tolerate profiteering and price gouging from Big Pharma, but again, it was really the countries that forced Big Pharma to do things that, frankly, I'm not sure they were comfortable doing, end quote. According to Morning Wire, the new order will allow Americans to buy drugs directly from manufacturers and cut out pharma's middleman, meaning pharmacy benefit managers, also known as PBMs, who work with insurance providers to negotiate prices with drug companies in exchange for that company covering the drug. Critics of the system say PBMs are not transparent and don't have an incentive to lower drug prices for Americans. Critics of Trump's executive order claim that it amounts to price controls, which is not part of free market economies. The order also sets a 30-day deadline for HHS to work with drug makers to reduce the cost of prescription drugs. If a deal is not reached by that time, then a new rule will kick in that will effectively lower the drug prices to whatever other nations are paying for them. Dr. Marty McKay, the head of the FDA, said, quote, the fundamental problem in healthcare is we've had non-competitive markets. We can do little things around the edges, or we can transform those markets to competitive markets, and that's what this executive order does today. Democrats, who, as a general rule, have opposed President Trump's policies, have remained mostly silent on this executive order. Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont, a Democrat socialist who caucuses with the Democrats, said that he agrees with Trump about the high prices of prescription drugs, but he did not back this executive order because he argues that it is an empty gesture that Trump knows will be struck down by the courts. Trump had implemented a similar regulation for certain cancer drugs during his first term, but the Biden administration abandoned the regulation after courts struck it down on procedural grounds. Sanders also made it clear that he doesn't agree that the European Union or Canada needs to pay their fair share. He thinks prices should be lowered for everyone, which would, of course, result in a lack of new innovations or progress in the field of medicine, which Bernie would understand if he had ever contributed anything to the world rather than just idolizing socialism, which clearly doesn't work based off of the countries that have tried it, whose healthcare systems are a mess. In Canada's case, there is a 24-month-long wait list to get in to see a doctor and no innovations on any front. So thank you, Bernie. You can keep your socialized medicine. My life actually depends on our medical system staying accessible. Thank you. On Tuesday, hours into the first day of Trump's visit to the Middle East, the White House announced that the United States and Saudi Arabia had signed the largest defense sales deal in history. This $142 billion deal will provide Saudi Arabia with state-of-the-art warfighting equipment and services from a dozen American defense firms. This deal is part of Saudi Arabia's larger commitment to make a $600 billion investment in the United States, which was also announced on Tuesday when the president also announced the end of sanctions against Syria in order to give the new government, quote, a chance at greatness, after overthrowing the Russian and Iranian-backed Assad regime last December. The new leader of Syria, Ahmed Hussein al-Sharia, formerly known by the nom de guerre Abu Muhammad al-Jilani, is a former al-Qaeda fighter who fought against American forces in Iraq. He was also a member of ISIS and HTS. He has been Syria's president since January and has attempted to rebrand himself as a moderate figure who is focused on Syrian interests rather than on jihad. Trump said, quote, "Far too many American presidents have been afflicted with the notion that it's our job to look into the souls of foreign leaders and use U.S. policy to dispense justice for their sins. It is God's job to sit in judgment, my job to defend America and to promote the fundamental interests of stability, prosperity, and peace," end quote. I think that's fine as long as you aren't naive enough to forget who you're dealing with. Trump also encouraged Saudi Arabia to join the Abraham Accords, which I also very much hope that they will do. And once again, Ben Shapiro covered a story this week with arguments that I can't really improve on or add to, so I'm going to just share with you some of what he had to say. Every day, a new stupid controversy is pushed by the left. Now it's the fact that the Trump administration has decided to grant some white South African refugees status. The New York Times reported dozens of white South Africans arrived in the United States on Monday on a chartered jet after being granted refugee status by the Trump administration, which has made it virtually impossible for any other refugees to seek safe haven in America. This, of course, is the problem that the left and the media are having. Why do these refugees get in when, say, Afghan refugees are not getting in? The Times continues, the arrival represents a drastic reversal in the United States refugee policies, which have long focused on helping people fleeing war, famine, and genocide. The South Africans say they have been discriminated against, denied job opportunities, and have been subject to violence because of their race, though the specifics of their cases are unclear. Trump said, quote, "Farmers are being killed. They happen to be white, but whether they're white or black makes no difference to me. But white farmers are being brutally killed, and their land is being confiscated in South Africa," end quote. To understand why the United States is bringing Afrikaners to the United States, we actually have to know a little bit about the history. So Afrikaners, also known as Boers, have been in South Africa since 1652. That's when the Dutch East India Company established a station at the Cape of Good Hope. For legitimately 350 years, and I'm just inserting for Americans who don't always know a lot of history, that's more than a century longer than the country of the United States has existed, there have been white people in South Africa. Originally, the Afrikaners were Dutch. Eventually, they were joined by both German and French citizens. The British Empire came in the early 19th century to establish its own colonies in South Africa. Eventually, this led to conflict. The British expanded their reach. The Boers made their way inland because they didn't actually want to be under the edicts of the British Empire. Eventually, there were some conflicts. The biggest conflict was the Second Boer War. That was because the Afrikaners were in an area called the Transvaal, a region very heavy with gold. The finding of gold in the Transvaal essentially incentivized the British Empire to try and expand its holdings in South Africa, leading to the Second Boer War that eventually ended with the British Empire victorious. In 1948, the National Party came to power and adopted a formal regime of apartheid. By 1950, the races were being categorized by law with special privileges for whites as opposed to blacks. Black people had no say in the government. In 1960, the so-called Sharpeville Massacre ended with the death of 69 anti-apartheid protesters. Nelson Mandela declared the end of nonviolent resistance and began engaging in violent activities directed against the government. He was arrested in 1962, sentenced to life imprisonment, and would end up spending nearly 3 decades in prison. Over time, international pressure led to the eventual end of apartheid, with the ban on the African National Congress, which was Mandela's party, ending in 1990. Mandela was freed from prison that same year. He was eventually inaugurated as president of South Africa. According to the media, that's where the story basically ends, because we're not supposed to talk about anything that happened after the end of apartheid. Everything was just hunky-dory after that. 2 things can be true at once. 1, apartheid was an evil system. But 2, lots of bad things have happened after apartheid. One of the dumb ways to cover politics is to suggest that because a bad thing is happening in one direction, no bad things have ever happened in the other direction or will ever happen in the other direction. Since the end of apartheid, there has been a radical upsurge in the amount of racial discrimination against whites. Today, black Africans represent about 81.4% of the population of South Africa. Colored, which is a reference in South Africa to people of mixed race, represents 8.2%. Whites represent 7.3%. That is a massive change since 1904, when 67.3% of the population was black African, but fully a fifth, 21.6%, was white. By 1996, those percentages had shifted dramatically. Suddenly, 77% of the South African population was black African, as opposed to 11% white. And today, as the white population has dropped dramatically, the government has increasingly started to pass laws that are directed against whites in South Africa. This year, the South African president, Cyril Ramaphosa, signed a bill into law allowing land seizure by the state without compensation. The great fear in South Africa is that it will do the same thing that Robert Mugabe did in Zimbabwe. Mugabe expropriated all land from whites and then targeted them. Ramaphosa can simply say, it's in the public interest to rejigger land ownership in South Africa. We are now taking all the land of white people in South Africa in response to South African apartheid. The hunky-dory version of South African history says that everybody got together and gave a big group hug after the end of apartheid, but that is actually not what happened. The ruling African National Congress, the party of Nelson Mandela, has been in charge of the country since 1994. In 2017, Jacob Zuma, the corrupt former president of the country from 2009 to 2018, adopted ANC policy that included, quote, fundamental change in the structures, systems, institutions, and patterns of ownership and control of the economy in favor of all South Africans, especially the poor, end quote. That was coded language for we're going to completely redo all the structures on a racialized basis. The ANC is a deeply corrupt party and is closely tied to the Chinese Communist Party, from which it receives money. They're also closely tied to Vladimir Putin's Russia, as well as Iran. Julius Malema, the head of the Economic Freedom Fighters, which is a radical party in South Africa, has led an enormous crowd in a stadium to chant, "Kill the Boer," which is the language of genocide. A bunch of communists shouted to kill the Boer. Never in the history of humanity have we ever seen communists attempt to exterminate an entire class of people, except for pretty much every communist regime everywhere. You might see why South Africans who are white feel under threat. Why is it a big deal that Afrikaners are being granted refugee status to come to the United States? Because the left is utterly puzzled at the idea that white people can ever be refugees. They're absolutely puzzled by the idea that this has been expressed by State Department Deputy Chris Landell that Afrikaners might have an easier time assimilating in the United States than, say, Afghan refugees. Why is it that they can assimilate easily into our country? It isn't about the fact that they are white. They all speak English. They are, by and large, capitalists. They agree with fundamental constitutional rights that are being violated in South Africa. It has nothing to do with the color of their skin and everything to do with the ideas that they hold and the cultural hallmarks that they bear in common with the United States. That may not hold true for Afghan refugees, where you literally have no idea what their ideas are. They don't speak English. There are a lot of things culturally that they do not have in common with Americans, up to and including a belief in constitutional rights. Are we going to just pretend that all potential immigrants to the United States have an equivalent level of assimilative capability? That's obviously untrue. Here are some additional conclusions from a recent paper out of the Center for International Development at Harvard University about the current state of affairs in South Africa. Quote, income per capita has been falling for over a decade. Unemployment at over 33% is the world's highest, and youth unemployment exceeds 60%. Poverty has risen to 55.5% based on the national poverty line, yet many more households depend on government transfers to sustain meager livelihoods. Most cities are failing to adequately connect people to productive opportunities and are failing to innovate, grow, and drive inclusion. Rural areas in former homelands, where almost 30% of South Africans live, exhibit dismally low employment rates and remain exceptionally poor. Critical networks industries, including electricity, transport, infrastructure and services, security and water and sanitation, have experienced major deteriorations over the last 15 years. Rail and port capacities have declined, generating large losses in exports. Urban crime is very high, and theft and sabotage undermine the functioning of many national infrastructure systems. It is an indisputable fact that South Africa today has even more laws based on race classifications than it did during the height of apartheid, and the country has become even more dysfunctional as a result. Yes, apartheid was evil, and it should be condemned. Also, what has been going on since then is also evil, and it should be condemned too. There are more than two options in the world. We do not actually have to choose between supporting the abuse and persecution of black people or supporting the abuse and persecution of white people. The press may not want you to consider the third option, which they hope that you are too stupid to notice exists, but we could always decide to not accept abuse or persecution of anyone. On Tuesday, a Los Angeles judge resentenced the Menendez brothers. Their new sentence is from 50 years up to life in prison, and it now makes them eligible for parole, which they previously were not. So this ruling could potentially open the door for the brothers to be released from prison. Lyle, who is 57, and Eric, who is 54, were originally sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole in 1996 for brutally murdering both of their parents, Jose and Kitty Menendez, back in 1989 inside their Beverly Hills home. The brothers justified the fatal shootings by claiming that they were enduring sexual abuse from their father that had gone on for several years. Their case received renewed interest after several high-profile entertainment projects were released including a Netflix docuseries. Judge Michael Jessic said that he'd given the case long thought, while describing Lyle and Eric's crime as absolutely horrific. He added that in his belief, they have been rehabilitated during their time in prison, where they have been for the last 3 decades. Eric said, quote, "I committed an atrocious act. My actions were criminal, selfish, and cowardly. I have come a long way on this path." Says the guy made infamous for trying desperately to cry on the stand in a notoriously unconvincing attempt to garner sympathy? Okay. In March, Nathan Hochman, the new Los Angeles County DA, filed a motion to withdraw the resentencing petition that his predecessor had filed, saying that the brothers' self-defense claims were nothing but lies. In response to this new sentence, he said, "The Menendez brothers have failed to come clean with the full extent of their criminal conduct, their cover-up, their lies, and their deceit." No comment. Speaking of killers, a 19-year-old former National Guardsman was arrested on Tuesday and charged with planning a mass shooting at a military base in Warren, Michigan, on behalf of ISIS. According to the DOJ, Amar Abdulmajid Mohammed Saeed, hey, I made it, told 2 undercover law enforcement agents that he planned to attack the United States Army's Tank Automotive and Armaments Command, TACCOM, at Warren. The 2 undercover agents indicated that they were ready to carry out Saeed's plan and scheduled the attack for May 13th, and Saeed was arrested once he launched his drone near the base. He is accused of several violations of the law when it came to planning this terrorist attack, including providing material assistance to the attack plan, providing armor-piercing ammunition and magazines for the attack, construction of Molotov cocktails for use during the attack, etc. TACCOM is home to 144 active-duty Army soldiers and more than 8,000 civilian employees and contractors for the Department of Defense. Brigadier General Rhett R. Cox, the commanding general of Army Counterintelligence Command, said, quote, "The arrest of this former soldier is a sobering reminder of the importance of our counterintelligence efforts to identify and disrupt those who would seek to harm our nation." According to the Department of Justice, Saeed now faces charges of attempting to provide material support to a foreign terrorist organization and distributing information related to a destructive device. He faces up to 20 years in prison for each count if he is convicted. The U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Michigan, Jerome F. Gordon Jr., summed up when he said, "ISIS is a brutal terrorist organization which seeks to kill Americans. Helping ISIS or any other terrorist organization prepare or carry out acts of violence is not only a reprehensible crime, it is a threat to our entire nation and way of life. Our office will not tolerate such crimes or threats, and we will use the full weight of the law against anyone who engages in terrorism. You have my full support in that objective." On Wednesday, President Trump signed a defense agreement with Qatar's Emir Al Thani. Unlike the sales deal for defense that was signed with Saudi Arabia on Tuesday, which aims to counterbalance Iranian influence in the region, this deal with Qatar risks empowering a nation with a history of supporting terrorism, who also has strong ties to Iran. Not a fan of this move, President Trump. Can you please tell me in all sincerity, why are we arming both sides of a conflict? again. And why are we arming our enemies again? I thought you were going to put an end to these bad foreign affair policies. Qatar signed a letter of intent to purchase $2 billion worth of MQ-9B Reaper drones and $1 billion in counter-drone technology. According to the White House, letters of intent were also signed between Qatar and the United States to, quote, further strengthen our security partnership. These letters outlined up to $38 billion in potential defense and security-related investments. Qatar also signed an agreement with the CEO of Boeing to purchase 210 American-made Boeing 787 Dreamliners and 777 aircrafts powered by GE Aerospace engines. The purchase is the largest 787 order in Boeing history. Trump's current warm stand on Qatar stands in stark contrast to his June 2017 statements on the country, in which he correctly accused the nation of backing terrorism, saying, and I quote, "The nation of Qatar, unfortunately, has historically been a funder of terrorism at a very high level." Since then, Qatar has continued to fund terrorist groups, giving over $2 billion to the Hamas-run government in Gaza, according to the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. For several years, Qatar has also hosted the leaders of Hamas as they live lives of luxury while making decisions that subject Palestinian civilians to war and death. They've also supported Hezbollah and the Muslim Brotherhood. Not a fan. I mean, you're going to have to explain why it is wrong for our universities to crawl into bed with terrorist supporters, which I agree it is wrong. But then why is it okay for our president to do the same thing? Not a fan. I still support the good, but this kind of stuff will result in you losing me eventually if it keeps up. Not that my individual vote matters yet, but I'm just saying. The lesser of two evils isn't going to cut it in the next election. You actually have to provide an alternative to the bad policies. Speaking of the Middle East, a heroic young Israeli police officer who was a father of three and saved many of his countrymen from Hamas on October the 7th, 2023, killing more than a dozen terrorists who were intent on slaughtering Israeli civilians, took his own life this week after suffering from survivor's guilt and PTSD. First Sergeant Igor Pevenev, I hope I'm pronouncing your name right, I mean it respectfully, age 32, has 3 daughters, and was in the police station in Hebron on October 7th when he heard Hamas had begun a murderous assault on his country. He drove to his home in a village near the Gaza border. On his way, he first encountered 2 terrorists and killed them, prompting 2 other terrorists to start shooting at him, both of whom he also killed. He recalled, quote, "The scenario in my head was that I would get home and see a lifeless house, but I put fear aside. From kibbutz near Yitzhak, I headed home, but I saw terrorists walking toward the kibbutz cowshed. Then a shootout began, lasting a few minutes. On my way from the police station to my community, I saw a suspicious white vehicle and stopped on the side of the road. I identified terrorists, I shot at them, and eliminated them. We had drills for situations like these, but I never believed that we would confront so many terrorists. When I heard about what happened in kibbutz Be'eri, I imagined how I'd be left without a wife and children. But I remained optimistic the entire time. After I eliminated the terrorist, I received a message from my wife that she is currently at the neighbors with the children, and she is fine and healthy. I said I'm on my way. I entered the house, and the look my wife gave me and the girls was that I had arrived as they had hoped. I gave a hug to the children. My feeling was that I was marrying my wife again, and that I was back 3 more times in the delivery room with the excitement of seeing my children come into the world. 3 months ago, Pivenev's wife posted the following to social media, quote, "If there are people around you that have been sinking since that Saturday," meaning October 7th, "turn the world on its head so that they can get the proper professional help and treatment. Don't try to save them alone. You can't, and things will just get worse. Fight the feelings of guilt. It's not your fault." May Mr. Pivenev rest in peace, and may God comfort his wife and children, along with everyone else who loved him. Let's follow that tragic story up with a much-needed laugh. Fortunately, hysterical headlines are why we have wokies. On Wednesday, several protesters were tackled and arrested by the Capitol Police after they began screaming incoherently in order to interrupt the testimony that was being given by the Health and Human Services Secretary RFK Jr. in front of the Senate Health Committee. And clearly a proceeding like that is something that is so controversial and sinister that it obviously must be stopped. Among the protesters who were arrested were, and I kid you not, you couldn't have scripted this any better, one of the guys desperate to stop a hearing on the poor health conditions of the American public was Ben Cohen, the co-founder of Ben and Jerry's ice cream. Gee, I wonder why he was upset. I guess everyone else was puzzled too, because Benny never made it clear why he was protesting in regards to Kennedy. He probably doesn't know what he's upset about either. I mean, other than potentially having to use ingredients that aren't harmful to his customers and will therefore cut into his profit margins, I'm guessing. But the other protesters clarified what had their panties in a twist with signs calling Kennedy anti-vaccine, while others read, "RFK lies, people with AIDS die." Yeah, thank you for that earth-shattering revelation. I'll phone the 80s right away and let them know that breaking news headline. Protest chants used to have something to do with the things that were upsetting you, but since these people have no earthly idea why they're upset, besides the fact that some influencer spoke to them from their hand and told them that they were upset, I guess they decided that protest cries are really meant to be random, neighborly public service announcements stating the obvious. The sky is blue. Fire is hot. We don't know why we're so weird. I know, this is serious. The ice cream man is very angry, and he eats his feelings. Kennedy and the others in the room were clearly startled when the protesters started shrieking during the secretary's opening statements. Some of them were heard yelling, "RFK kills people with hate." Okay. Yep. Hundreds of death certificates out there right now list the cause of death as Bobby's hate. I mean, not in the real world, but in the wonderland that plays 24/7 in these people's heads, sure. Toxins in food, they're totally good with that. You can be healthy at any weight, that's not a bald-faced lie. The skyrocketing chronic disease rate's nothing to see here. But non-existent hate is the #1 killer that must take priority right now. There will be no addressing of the real problems here. We can only talk about the echo chamber obsessions of the perpetually online and mentally ill. But I repeat myself. Seek help. Get medicated. And then check back in with us when you have rejoined humanity here on planet Earth. Anyway, the Capitol Police quickly stepped in to remove the crazy people, protesters, by force. According to authorities, as reported by Fox News, Cohen was arrested for obstruction. 6 other people were arrested too. Kennedy went on to spar with several Democrats. In one instance, Representative Rosa DeLauro of Connecticut accused Kennedy of potentially breaking the law and putting Americans' health at risk over the cuts he made at Health and Human Services, to which Bobby shot back by describing the absolute cataclysmic disorganization of the department when he took it over, a department which he then pointed out had been under her personal oversight for decades. Burn. He elaborated. We had 9 separate offices of women's health, and when we consolidated them, Democrats say we're eliminating them. We're not. We're still appropriating the $3.7 billion, but we're not keeping all 9. We had 8 separate offices for minority health. We eliminated 1. We had 27 HIV offices. We had 59 behavioral health programs. Later in the hearing, Kennedy called on Democrats to work together with him on health initiatives by saying, let's work together and do something we all believe in, which is have healthy kids in our country, for God's sake. There's no such thing as Republican children or Democrat children. There's just kids, and we should all be concerned with them. Yeah, clearly Bobby's the kooky, unhinged one. I'll tell you what. I'll buy y'all a mirror if you're brave enough to look at the horror show that it has to show you, because we've all gotten an eyeful in recent years. Your turn, if you dare. And speaking of Democrats who don't know why they're always so angry, ICE carried out a week of raids in Nashville, Tennessee, arresting nearly 200 illegal aliens. And this, of course, prompted outrage from the city's Democratic mayor. Of the 196 illegal aliens that were detained by ICE, 95 of them had criminal convictions or pending charges, and 31 of them had illegally re-entered the United States after previously being deported. So if you're counting, 70 of those people were here illegally. 31 came back illegally several times after being deported, which is stealing resources from our justice system, which has to bear the costs for continuing to deal with them after their case had been ruled on, and the rest committed other additional crimes on top of that. An investigation by the Daily Wire found that one of the captured illegal aliens is a 60-year-old Iraqi national who was convicted of rape, and who also failed to register as a sex offender. Another is a 33-year-old from El Salvador who is believed to be part of the violent MS-13 gang that has been officially designated as a foreign terrorist organization. The government of El Salvador also suspects that same man of committing aggravated murder. There's also a Haitian male convicted of possessing meth with the intent to distribute it, a Salvadorian convicted of possessing cocaine with the intent to manufacture and sell the drug, and a Guatemalan national with a conviction for aggravated assault. So, naturally, it would be a tragic loss for America if we didn't keep these people here and import more of the world's criminals to flout our laws instead of their own. So Nashville's Democratic mayor, Freddie O'Connell, said that ICE's immigration enforcement raids caused, quote, deep community harms. Yeah, the crimes that these people were committing were apparently victimless in his mind, but enforcing the laws that 80% of Americans want enforced deeply harmful to us all. He added that he was heartbroken over the federal law enforcement agency's actions. Yes, I too weep for the criminals from other countries who aren't my problem. Wait, no, I don't. I weep for Lake and Riley, and the angel moms and dads, and the children who end up being trafficked by these cartels, and the teenagers who are poisoned with fentanyl and die, and the victims of these illegal crimes. You know, the people formerly known as victims, not to mention the Americans who have less help available to them because their tax dollars are being spent on people who have never paid into our system and who therefore have no right to our money after flipping the bird to our laws. O'Connell also announced the creation of the Belonging Fund, which is a joint project between the city of Nashville and a local foundation so that they can support organizations that assist illegal aliens with their child care costs, transportation, and food needs. Now, I mean, Americans often get no such help, but why shouldn't we be at the bottom of the list in the minds of the politicians that we elect to represent us? The mayor also signed an executive order requiring city employees and police to report any communications with ICE to his office. Nashville's legal director, Wally Detz, acknowledged that the city government can do nothing to prevent ICE, as a federal agency, from carrying out enforcement operations in Nashville, saying, quote, "We are powerless. We have absolutely no authority to instruct ICE not to carry out their enforcement actions. We have no authority to tell Tennessee Highway Patrol they cannot cooperate with ICE." I'm glad that message is starting to sink in. A democracy is not a free-for-all, where you always get your way and can force it down the throats of the majority made up of regular people. Our votes count just as much as yours do. We each get one, but on this issue there are way more of us than there are of you. Meaning, on this one, you don't get your way. On Thursday, Ukraine's President Vladimir Zelensky landed in Turkey for what was supposed to be a face-to-face negotiation with Russia's President Vladimir Putin. Instead, only Putin's underlings were there. Putin had proposed direct talks with Ukraine during a televised address on Sunday. Zelensky had responded by challenging Putin to come to Istanbul himself for a face-to-face meeting. But when Putin chickened out, Russia's foreign ministry spokeswoman called him, and I quote, "a clown and a loser." Trump followed pattern by excusing Putin and bad-mouthing Zelensky, even though Ukraine is at the table, and it's his job to apply pressure to Russia so that they will come to the table too, and this can end. I honestly think that Trump doesn't know how to get Putin to the table, and he doesn't want to be seen trying and failing. He got taken in by Putin's flattery and thought he could charm him by lifting sanctions and speaking well of him, and then Trump found out that he had been duped, and now he has no cards left to play. I mean, that's my take after watching this for a while. I would love to be proven wrong. On Wednesday, a young Israeli mother of 3 was on her way to the hospital to deliver her 4th child with her husband when she was shot and killed by Palestinian terrorists, leaving her baby boy, who was delivered by emergency C-section, fighting for his life. The IDF Chief of Staff, Lieutenant General Ilal Zamir, said, "This is a difficult and painful attack in which an Israeli civilian was killed on her way to a delivery room. I share in the deep sorrow of the family. We are engaged in broad fighting against terror in Judea and Samaria, also known as the West Bank, and we will continue. We will activate all our tools, and we will reach the murderers to bring them to justice." Attacks like these are not unprecedented. For example, another Israeli woman was 7 months pregnant with her 2nd child back in 2003 when she and her husband were shot by 5 Palestinian terrorists. Her husband was killed instantly, and she was left in critical condition while her daughter was delivered via an emergency C-section. The group that claimed responsibility for the attack was the so-called Al-Aqsa Martyrs, Brigade, which is the military wing of Fatah, which is now headed up now by the president of the Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas. That woman survived and posted the following in response to the latest attack. Reading about Salah Gaz, I hope I am pronouncing your name correctly, a young pregnant woman on her way to the delivery room for the happiest event of her life, bringing life into the world. Her husband was injured in the attack while they were fighting for the baby's life, and I can't help but go back 21 years. I was there too. I was also a pregnant woman traveling with her husband on the road of Samaria. We also encountered a squad of murderers who fired at our car. Shuli, my beloved husband, was murdered, and I, wounded, was taken to emergency surgery. My daughter Sarah was born then, in the 6th month, 3 hours after her father was murdered. And even then, they fought for her life. Yesterday, just as we were celebrating Sarah's engagement, the terrible news came. We are dealing with a cruel enemy, an enemy who seeks to kill Jews. In the middle of the night, on dark roads, in order to defeat him and to eradicate him, we must first know his cruel and murderous nature and his goals. I mean, I've said it before, and I will say it again. The terrorists are right that this is a battle between people who love life and people who love death, and I know which side I am on. In better news from the Middle East, on Thursday, President Trump announced over $200 billion in commercial deals that were agreed on by the United States and the United Arab Emirates. The UAE was the last leg of Trump's Gulf tour, which led to massive deals with both Saudi Arabia and Qatar, as well as the UAE. These transformative deals, as the White House is calling them, included Boeing and GE Aerospace securing a $14.5 billion commitment from Etihad Airways for 28 Boeing 787s and 777 aircraft, and a $4 billion investment by Emirates Global Aluminum in Oklahoma to build one of the first new American aluminum smelters in 45 years, which sounds like good news for my state. Other deals that were announced related to the energy, technology, and minerals sector. These deals are in addition to the UAE's March commitment to invest $1.4 trillion in American energy, manufacturing, and technology over the next decade. So that all sounds promising. Back on the home front, on Monday, dozens of commercial aircrafts were left practically flying blind after an outage at Denver's airport air traffic control left pilots unable to communicate with the controllers. The control center oversees aircraft movements across 9 states. When multiple radio transmitters failed, between 15 and 20 commercial aircraft that were approaching Denver International Airport lost all communication with controllers. Initial reports indicated that the outage was up to 6 minutes long, but the FAA has since clarified that the outage lasted approximately 90 seconds and that it is investigating the cause. According to ABC 7, controllers were already operating on a 5th backup frequency when the system crashed, because the 4 other backup frequencies had already crashed before that. When the final frequency went down, a controller eventually reached one pilot using a distress channel, and he then relayed instructions to the other aircrafts. David Riley, who is a retired air traffic controller with 32 years of experience, said that the FAA's equipment was getting old and is now a risk that should no longer be tolerated, saying, quote, "It is not acceptable. And the biggest problem is the fact that the FAA does not have stable funding to replace this equipment and maintain it in an appropriate fashion," end quote. The Transportation Secretary, Sean Duffy, acknowledged the problem with the outdated infrastructure, saying, quote, "We should be using fiber, but it's copper. We use radar from the 1970s, Some of them are from the 80s, but most of them from the 70s. So this technology is 50 years old that our controllers use to scan the skies and keep airplanes separated from one another. End quote. The Transportation Department does plan to ask Congress for billions of dollars to overhaul the system, including replacing 618 radars and upgrading all FAA computers that are used by controllers. The FAA has experienced severe staffing shortages, with Newark Library International Airport recently operating with just 3 controllers when 14 are required. This is not due to cuts, as no cuts have been made to air traffic controllers. This is a shortage of replacements when compared to the rate people are retiring from air traffic control. In a statement to Fox Business on Thursday, the FAA admitted that the Denver outage was partially due to the fact that the antiquated air traffic control system is affecting our workforce. This incident is the latest of several high-profile aviation accidents and near misses that have occurred across the United States in recent months. And speaking of disasters in government, the former FBI director, James Comey, got himself into some hot water over what he called a shell formation that he just happened to stumble on while walking down the beach. Comey shared a photograph on Instagram which showed seashells that had been arranged to form the numbers 86. Meaning to kill, you're going to 86 someone, and 47, which was interpreted to mean get rid of President Trump, the 47th president of the United States. The post was captioned, "Cool shell formation on my beach walk." The post was later deleted, but not before it caught the attention of other people, including the current FBI Director, Kash Patel. Meghan McCain posted, "Don't know how this can be interpreted as any other way but a threat against President Trump. James Comey should at the very least get a visit from the Secret Service. Also, is everyone mentally ill? I mean, some people obviously are pretty unstable. That's clear." The FBI Director Kash Patel responded to the post on X, saying that the Bureau was aware of the recent social media posts by former FBI Director James Comey, directed at President Trump. "We are in communication with the Secret Service and Director Comey. Primary jurisdiction is with Secret Service on these matters, and we, the FBI, will provide all necessary support." Comey then tried to claim, quote, "I posted a picture earlier of some shells I saw on a beach walk, which I assumed were a political message. I didn't realize some folks associate those numbers with violence. It never occurred to me, but I oppose violence of any kind, so I took the post down." Okay, Mr. Comey, with all due respect, what did you think the message was, if not a threat against the president's life, Mr. G-Man? You thought it was a political message saying what? If you expect us to buy this, you're going to have to give us a little bit more detail, because no one else bought your explanation either. As Greg Price commented, Comey deleted his threat against President Trump and posted a statement claiming he just randomly stumbled across Trump derangement syndrome shell art and had no idea what it meant. Yes, I'm sure the guy who once ran the FBI was just clueless on this one. Exactly. I mean, he either just publicly threatened the life of the president on the internet, which is forever, in the context of 2 assassination attempts that aren't even a year old yet, or he really is a clueless moron that was inappropriately put in charge of one of the most powerful government agencies in the world, which would at least explain why he abused his powers so blatantly. So, Mr. Comey, which of these two pathetic guys do you really want to be? On Friday, the 27-year-old New Jersey man who was convicted back in February of stabbing and partially blinding the famed novelist Salman Rushdie received the maximum sentence for his crime of 25 years. Hadi Matar was convicted of second-degree attempted murder. The attack also injured the event's moderator, Henry Reese, the co-founder of Pittsburgh City of Asylum. Rushdie had drawn the ire of the Iranian regime over his 1988 novel, The Satanic Verses. Then he was stabbed by Matar somewhere between 10 and 15 times in the head, neck, torso, and left hand at New York's Art Institute. After the book was published, Ayatollah Khomeini issued a public call for Rushdie's assassination, and Matar attempted to do just that on videotape. Now he will pay the price for his violence, even though, thankfully, he failed to accomplish his goal. Regarding other scandals, audio of the interview between former Special Counsel Robert Hur and former President Joe Biden from October 23 was obtained by the news outlet Axios and made public. The recordings were taken over 2 3-hour sessions. The tapes show the extent to which Biden struggled to recall the simplest bits of information. Biden told investigators that his reason for keeping a classified document on Afghanistan was, and I quote, "I don't know if it was going to be the subject of reporting, but I wanted to hang on to it. I guess I wanted to hang on to it just for posterity's sake. I mean, this was my position on Afghanistan." Yeah, that's not how classified documents work. At other times in the clip, Biden repeated himself, backtracked, and struggled to string together more than a handful of words at a time before pausing again, appearing to lose his train of thought, trying to recollect what he intended to say, and in several instances, Biden just dropped off midway through a sentence, muttering, "Anyway," as we have all repeatedly seen him do. In the Hur report, the special counsel said Mr. Biden's memory was significantly limited, both during his recorded interviews with the ghostwriter in 2017 and in his interview with our office in 2023. We have also considered that at trial, Mr. Biden would likely present himself to a jury as he did during our interview of him, as a sympathetic, well-meaning, elderly man with a poor memory. In our final story of the week, the mayor of New York City, Eric Adams, announced that 2 crew members were killed and nearly 24 more were injured after a Mexican Navy tall ship lost power and crashed into the Brooklyn Bridge on Saturday evening. Videos were posted to social media showing the moment that the masts of the vessel snapped as it slammed into the bridge. There were 227 people aboard, 19 were injured, 2 of them critically, and 2 more died as a result of their injuries. The bridge sustained no damage and was reopened to the public. Thank you for listening to today's episode. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, please help build this podcast into a success by clicking like and follow, because that's what does the trick. And I hope you come back again next week. Until then, have a good week, my friends.